So, Anna,
So, Shay.
today we're going to talk about something that most people despise talking about, perhaps even thinking about.
Oh, geez.
Yes, today we're going to talk about being wrong.
You're right. That's not a very fun topic.
It might feel a little uncomfortable, but errors and being wrong is necessary in education and in life.
To err is human, after all.
So true. And it's not until we understand how errors make us feel that we can see how our biases towards them might be showing up in how we correct our students.
That is, if we correct our students. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shay. So, Anna, let's jump right into it today and address error correction in the classroom.
Yes, heads up, listeners. This might get a little linguistic-y, but I think there's something in there for everyone.
Definitely.
Teachers and researchers tend to have very different opinions on error correction.
To correct or not to correct.
Right. Tough decision.
There is evidence, though, that corrective feedback, at least in language learning, is important. It provides negative evidence. It tells learners, especially adult learners, where they might be going off course in learning the target language.
Yeah, adults especially tend to want correction.
So then, why do you think it's so controversial? I feel like everyone has different associations with wrongness.
Yeah, I think many people have strong views about error correction based on their own previous learning experiences. Some people have had more pleasant experiences with feedback and error correction. They like to be corrected. Others don't handle it as well.
And for educators, naturally, it's really challenging to separate your learner self from your teacher self. So that relationship with error correction is going to sneak its way into your tendencies as an instructor, right?
Sneaky. And also, we have this question of, are you a strict grammarian, what we might call a prescriptivist? Or do you come from a descriptive school of thought?
Yeah, so a prescriptivist would say that rules of language are not fluid, not to be messed with, and I should correct anything that defies those rules. But a descriptivist would maintain that language is fluid, and the primary goal is simply being understood.
So Shay, what's your perspective on error correction?
Well, I would definitely consider myself a descriptivist. The other day, for example, I was working with a student on note-taking skills, annotations, and that sort of thing. And while looking at the student's questions for the author, I came across some errors in grammar, specifically the use of the as a definite article. The student said that he tended to overuse them, which I could confirm, but in that moment, it wasn't something that was impeding my understanding of his notes, so I let it slide. I did make a note, though, of this tendency to overuse articles and pulled resources to revisit later when it could be examined in different contexts and ultimately be more meaningful.
I'm similar. I can get a little carried away with the grammar, but I know how to stop myself and focus my feedback, tailor it to the objectives and to my students.
Yeah, so you see how different teachers might have different opinions on error correction.
And also, in addition to what teachers think, we need to consider students' views about error correction, since they're the ones affected by the feedback.
From my experience working with adult language learners of various proficiency levels, I find such distinctive desires from one student to another when it comes to correction preference. For the most part, though, students seem to want to be explicitly corrected. What have you found?
Oh, I definitely know some students who want to be corrected. But it really depends on the learner. Some just shut down if you start correcting them. Others live for corrections in the moment, especially those who are aiming for so-called perfection.
Yes, and then you have the learners who are interested in generating language that's accurate enough, but they're happy just communicating and they don't feel that they need more assistance or simply would prefer being corrected after the fact, not while they're speaking.
There could be so many reasons they don't want to be interrupted with a correction.
Right, so what do we do about this?
Well, let's make sure that we're all on the same page with what exactly we're talking about. What is an error?
It's such a seemingly simple question that's actually quite loaded.
Well, for our purposes, Shay, let's try to simplify.
Okay, fine. So an error could be defined as a gap in a learner's knowledge of something, of the language they use, of content, of processes.
Right. In linguistic terms, the way they're expressing themselves deviates from standard norms of the target language they're trying to learn. They might have developed some kind of pattern about how they use the language that doesn't technically match what's accepted as correct, so to speak, in that language.
Yes, and this gap suggests that this is something that the student has already learned.
Yeah.
So we examine it at the level of competence, asking ourselves if they're able to formulate language in a particular way. And when they're not, we can say that they are errors because they're systematic, tending to present themselves repeatedly.
Right, there's a pattern of error, whereas a mistake would suggest that the content is something that the student hasn't yet been exposed to, or it's just a slip-up that happens every now and then, not part of a pattern. For the most part, mistakes just happen. It's what we would consider a question of performance, and they're usually noticeable by their speaker and corrected in the moment. Something that we might refer to as autocorrection.
Yes, a student who makes a mistake might stop and correct what she has said, but an error is a trend that probably requires some sort of intervention on the instructor's part, while a mistake is just a slip, a blooper.
And we always have lots of bloopers when we're recording this podcast,
so many
right?
bloopers.
We know exactly what we want to say, and then we just don't.
We just don't. So I think that making this distinction between mistake and error is crucial, and it's something that I've spent time in class talking about with my students. They really like understanding the difference between the two because it helps them see that every time they slip up doesn't necessarily mean that they're total failures.
Right? That's a great point.
We also want to remind students that errors are a part of a learner's language development, a sign of the learner's learning. This actually makes me think of the idea of interlanguage.
Yes, that was at the tip of my tongue there. The idea of interlanguage is crucial in understanding language development. For those unfamiliar with the concept, it was first introduced by Selinker in 1972, and it basically means the state of a learner's language at any point in time during their development. It essentially points out that a learner's form of language exists as a language in and of itself. It avoids constantly comparing a learner's language to the target language, the language the learner seeks to acquire. Errors are just a feature of the learner's unique interlanguage at that point in time. With continued development, those features of the interlanguage might change so that they're more closely aligned with the target language. These so-called errors are no longer part of the learner's language system at some point.
So this builds on Corder, 1967, who suggested errors can tell us about how students learn rather than show us how a student is deficient or lacking. Instead, errors to Corder are an important part of development in their target language. And we should celebrate them, really.
Woo!
Since it signifies that there's processing happening, ideas being internalized.
Yeah, errors are normal and actually very important. Students need to know that. And errors can even act as guides in the language acquisition process.
Right. Students can get important feedback from errors, and teachers can better understand their students' learning process, understand what they need to address more closely, reteach, re-explain, or simply address more systematically.
Yeah, errors can be really helpful guides, and they can help us decide whether in a single lesson or across a whole course, how we need to shift our focus or approach.
Teach, reflect, revise.
Yep.
The cycle continues. So noticing errors is helpful for us from an instructional standpoint, tools that will then go on to serve the student.
Yeah, again, this theme of reframing our approach presents itself in our conversation.
Yes, we've managed to find the silver lining again. But what about in the instances that we hear so many errors? How do we choose what to correct? And how do we make corrective feedback more productive?
Yeah, there's so many errors we could pay attention to. We have phonological errors, so that's pronunciation, lexical or vocabulary, syntactic or grammar, semantic, that is misinterpreted meaning, or pragmatic, like sociocultural norms, the rules of conversation. So what do we even focus on when there's so many types of errors we could target?
Well, ultimately here, you want to choose your battle, right? You wouldn't aim to correct every blunder you hear. It's impossible, and it would be really discouraging.
Right, so you want to ask yourself, what's the aim of this lesson? What are my objectives?
And then from there, determine what would be the most productive use of your time, essentially. What do students need to be producing correctly for me to be able to say that they've mastered X objective?
And with that, you have to also make sure that what you're providing feedback on connects back to that objective. Is form crucial to this activity, or is meaning more important right now? Corrective feedback would look really different depending on your answer.
Cool. So meaning-focused instruction focuses on communicative language teaching and does not lend itself to explicit attention to language form. The target language is just a way of communicating.
Yep, and on the flip side, form-focused instruction is more about language in and of itself. It's about rules and structures, less about communication. This can be considered an isolated approach because language form is isolated from its communicative purpose.
But there has to be a happy medium, an integrated approach, perhaps.
Yes, and that's actually what it's called. A highlight of an integrated approach is that you're providing error correction on various levels while learners are using the language to communicate.
So this way, learners can understand how the structures and rules they're using connect to the meaning they're trying to communicate. I think most of us would agree that this integrated approach helps a lot with accuracy and fluency.
Speaking of which, the question of whether you're seeking accuracy or fluency is also really important in determining strategy for corrective feedback.
This is so key. A student who is more fluent than accurate can be, in some cases, more successful at communication than someone who is more accurate than fluent.
And if you're seeking fluency, you'll probably focus on meaning-focused feedback. But if you're targeting accuracy, form-focused feedback is necessary.
Yeah, they do align nicely, don't they? This is something that the integrated approach to corrective feedback does well. It encourages balance.
It also encourages a growth mindset for students, doesn't it? Like, listen, maybe you didn't use the past tense correctly, but you were still understood.
And I'd say the two of us prioritize comprehensibility and intelligibility.
For sure.
I've always been a proponent of integrating this idea of growth in a learning environment, and I think that shows up in the form of positive encouragement here. Like we try to get our students to do. Lead with the positive, follow up with an area that requires attention, and then end on a positive note.
Of course, creating a positive environment where students feel comfortable with errors is ideal. They have to feel that what is being called out can be addressed and not feel attacked.
And I think one of the easiest ways to make students feel attacked is to overcorrect. There is such a thing as correcting too much.
Yeah, especially when you're taking an integrated approach, not focusing only on form but also on meaning.
It really is a sliding scale. You can go from way too much feedback to not enough feedback. As teachers, we need to decide what amount and what kind of feedback will actually lead to positive outcomes. When a student is having issues getting meaning across, I think it's important to prioritize those errors first, right? Before moving on to some of the smaller details, which actually might develop naturally over time anyway.
Right, and error correction doesn't just happen from teacher to student. While working in pairs, the students also have to negotiate meaning.
Yes, peer feedback, the unsung hero. We have to keep in mind that correction is traditionally termed as feedback by teachers, but there is such immense value in getting students to give feedback to one another.
True.
Just by negotiating meaning amongst themselves, asking for clarification and whatnot. Plus, this is another 2-for-1 deal, since when creating a learning community, it's crucial that we don't reinforce those hierarchies of authority and lead learners to believe that the only truth comes from the mouths of their instructors.
Feedback also comes from very natural interactions. It isn't always necessary to crack down on an error.
Great. So, what's come out of this discussion? Errors are good. They're a sign of development. There's a fine balance between not enough feedback and too much. We need to consider whether feedback should be meaning-focused or form-focused. And the teacher doesn't have to be the only one giving feedback all the time.
Boom. Lots to think about. And I think clearly this is going to be a 2-episode topic.
Yes,
so Let's give our listeners a chance to reflect on their experiences before we come back together and get into the nitty-gritty of corrective feedback strategy.
So where do you fall on the continuum of beliefs about error correction? Do you believe that error correction is more harmful or beneficial? Why?
Do you tend to subscribe to meaning-focused instruction or form-focused instruction? Share your teaching philosophy as it relates to corrective feedback. When do you feel corrective feedback is most effective in the language classroom? What about least effective?
We welcome you to reflect on these questions and join the conversation on our various social media accounts. You can email us via our contact form at teacherthinkaloud.com or contact us via Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. We welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
For more resources and references on today's topic, take a look at our website and our podcast Anchor page, anchor.fm/teacherthinkaloud. Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. And until next time, happy teaching
and happy reflecting.